when Kalisha volunteered to care for the Reed triplets, the 5-year-old terrors who'd driven away 12 nannies in 6 months. Everyone thought she'd lost her mind. She was about to discover they were right. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get into the story. The emergency childcare agency's office smelled like desperation and instant coffee, a combination that perfectly matched Kalisha Williams' current state of mind. She sat in the plastic chair that had seen better decades, watching other caregivers flip through job listings with the enthusiasm of people shopping for root canals. "Trust me, honey," whispered Mrs. Chun, a veteran nanny with 30 years of experience. "You don't want the Reed account. That family is cursed." Kalisha looked up from the incident reports she'd been reading. 12 different nannies, 12 different resignation letters, all citing the same 3 names: Ethan, Oliver, and Caleb Reed. Ages 5, identical triplets, sons of billionaire Harrison Reed. What exactly happened to make everyone quit? Kalisha asked, though the reports painted a vivid picture. Furniture destroyed, emergency room visits, one nanny found locked in a bathroom crying, another discovered hiding in her car in the parking garage. "Those boys don't just throw tantrums," said Janet, a woman who'd once managed a household with 7 children. "They orchestrate chaos. Military-level strategic chaos. The youngest one, Caleb, he's the mastermind. Doesn't say much, but his brothers execute his plans like tiny generals." Mrs. Chun nodded grimly. "The agency's offering triple the standard rate just to get someone through the door. Mr. Reed's getting desperate. Board members are threatening intervention if he can't get his home life under control." Kalisha studied the file photos clipped to each resignation letter. 3 identical faces with cherubic smiles and eyes that definitely held mischief. But underneath the warnings and horror stories, she saw something else. 3 little boys who'd lost 12 caregivers in 6 months. That kind of instability would make any child act out. "How bad could it really be?" she murmured. The entire waiting room went silent. Every caregiver, from fresh-faced college students to seasoned professionals, stared at her like she'd just volunteered to wrestle alligators. "Did you read Nancy Morrison's report?" Mrs. Chun held up a thick folder. 25 years of experience, worked for senators and celebrities. Lasted 4 days with the Reed boys. 4 days, she said, and I quote, "Those children operate like a small terrorist cell with juice boxes." What about Patricia Williams? No relation. She specialized in difficult children. Found her rocking in the corner of the playroom, muttering something about tiny dictators and psychological warfare. Janet supplied helpfully. Kalisha flipped through more reports. Each one detailed increasingly elaborate schemes. The triplets had flooded a bathroom to create an indoor water park, convinced a nanny that the fire alarm was a dinner bell, and somehow managed to order 17 pizzas and a pony using Siri. A pony. But instead of fear, Kalisha felt something unexpected: intrigue. These weren't random acts of destruction. These were coordinated, creative, intelligent attempts to what? Get attention? Test boundaries? Express frustration? She thought about her own childhood, 4 younger siblings, a mother working double shifts, and herself at 8 years old trying to keep everyone fed, bathed, and out of trouble. She'd learned early that the most difficult behavior usually came from the deepest needs. "I'll take it," she said suddenly. The room erupted in a chorus of "don't do it," and "you're making a mistake," and one very dramatic, "we hardly knew ye." Mrs. Peterson, the agency director, appeared at Kalisha's elbow with remarkable speed. "Are you certain, dear? We have other lovely families." "I'm certain." Kalisha stood, gathering the incident reports. "When can I start?" "Immediately," Mrs. Peterson said, relief flooding her voice. Mr. Reed is quite eager to interview candidates. Though I should mention, the last 3 interviews ended with the candidates leaving before meeting the children. What happened? One heard them screaming from the elevator and turned around. Another made it to the front door, heard what sounded like furniture being thrown, and decided she had a sudden family emergency. The third actually met the boys but lasted exactly 7 minutes before she said she didn't feel safe and called an Uber. Kalisha nodded, making mental notes. What's his address? An hour later, she stood in the marble lobby of Reed Tower's residential section, adjusting her best blouse and trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt like ascending to another planet, each floor taking her further from her world of struggling to make rent and wondering if her car would start, into a realm where people owned entire floors of buildings. The elevator stopped at the 42nd floor with a soft chime, and the doors opened to reveal a private hallway that screamed money. But it was the sounds coming from behind the mahogany door marked Penthouse that made her pause. Shouting, not playful children's voices, but full-throated, defiant shouting. Something crashed, heavy and expensive sounding. A man's voice, strained with patience, trying to negotiate what sounded like a hostage situation. Boys, please. Just put down the NO. Don't throw that. Another crash. More shouting. Now what sounded like was that a vacuum cleaner being used as a weapon. Kalisha pressed the doorbell. The chaos inside stopped abruptly, replaced by suspicious silence. Footsteps approached. Heavy, exhausted, defeated footsteps. The door opened to reveal a man who looked like he'd been through a natural disaster. Harrison Reed was everything the Forbes photos suggested. Tall, broad-shouldered, expensively dressed. But his white dress shirt was splattered with what looked like finger paint, his dark hair was disheveled, and there was a wild look in his storm-gray eyes that suggested he was questioning every life decision that had led to this moment. "You must be from the agency," he said, his voice carrying the hollow tone of a man who'd given up hope. "I'm Harrison Reed." "Kalisha Williams," she replied, noting how his handshake was firm despite the obvious exhaustion. "I volunteered for the position." "Volunteered?" He blinked, as if the concept was foreign. "You mean you read the file and still chose to come here?" "I did." He stared at her for a long moment, then glanced over his shoulder toward what she assumed was the source of the earlier chaos. "Are you sure you have the right apartment? These are the Reed triplets we're talking about." Before Kalisha could respond, 3 small figures appeared in the hallway behind Harrison like tiny soldiers emerging from battle. Identical faces, identical defiant expressions, and identical stances that suggested they were prepared for war. The tallest one, by maybe an inch, stepped forward with the confidence of a general addressing troops. "Daddy, is this another quitter?" "Ethan, that's not," Harrison began. "The last one ran away crying," the second boy announced with satisfaction. "We weren't even doing anything bad. We just wanted to see if her hair was real." "Oliver." The third boy hung back, watching Kalisha with intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog everything about her. Her clothes, her posture, her expressions. This had to be Caleb, the mastermind Mrs. Chun had warned her about. "Boys," Harrison said with the weary patience of someone who'd had this conversation before. "This is Miss Williams. She's here too." "We don't need another nanny," Ethan interrupted, crossing his arms over his paint-splattered shirt. "We can take care of ourselves. We made breakfast this morning," Oliver added proudly. "Cereal and ice cream and gummy bears." Harrison's jaw tightened. "That's not breakfast, and you know it." "It was delicious," Caleb spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that made his brothers nod in agreement. Kalisha studied the family dynamics playing out in front of her. Harrison, clearly overwhelmed but trying to maintain authority. The boys, unified in their resistance to outside help, but also testing their father's limits. This wasn't random defiance. This was strategic opposition. What do you think drives the triplets to be so resistant to nannies? Share your thoughts about what might be behind their stubborn behavior. Well, Kalisha said, crouching down to their eye level, that does sound delicious. But I'm curious. Who's the mastermind behind the breakfast menu? 3 pairs of eyes widened slightly. Adults didn't usually ask about masterminds. Caleb stepped forward, no longer content to observe. We all decided together. Ah! Kalisha nodded seriously. Democracy in action. I respect that. Though I have to ask, how did you reach the cereal? The kitchen cabinets looked pretty tall. The boys exchanged glances, and she could practically see the silent communication passing between them. We're very good climbers, Ethan said carefully. Olympic level, Oliver added. And we use teamwork, Caleb finished. Harrison was watching this exchange with fascination, as if he'd never seen anyone engage with his sons without immediately trying to correct their behavior. Teamwork is important, Kalisha agreed. I bet you 3 make quite a team. The question is, are you looking for teammates or opponents? Another round of silent communication between the brothers. What do you mean? Ethan asked, suspicion clear in his voice. Well, from what I understand, you've had 12 nannies, and all of them ended up being opponents. People trying to make you do things you didn't want to do, change rules you'd already figured out, interrupt systems that were working for you. She paused, letting that sink in. But what if someone came along who wanted to be on your team instead? Caleb tilted his head, studying her with the intensity of a scientist examining a new specimen. What kind of team? The kind where we figure out solutions together instead of fighting about problems separately. The kind where everyone's voice matters, even if someone has to make the final decision. Harrison was staring at her now with something approaching disbelief. She could practically hear him thinking, is she seriously negotiating with 5-year-olds? We don't like rules, Oliver announced. Rules are boring, Ethan agreed. Rules can be boring, Kalisha nodded. But what about agreements? What if, instead of me telling you what to do, we talked about what everyone needs and found ways to make sure everyone gets what they need? Even us, Caleb asked quietly. Especially you. The silence stretched between them, and Kalisha could sense Harrison holding his breath. This was either going to be the shortest interview on record, or something entirely different was about to happen. Finally, Ethan spoke. What if we don't want to clean our room? Then we'd talk about why room cleaning feels bad to you, and figure out if there's a way to keep your space organized that doesn't feel like punishment. What if we don't want to eat vegetables? Oliver tried. Then we'd experiment with different vegetables and different ways to prepare them until we found some that you actually enjoyed, instead of forcing you to eat things that taste bad to you. What if we want to stay up past bedtime? Caleb asked the real test question. Kalisha smiled. Then we'd talk about what makes bedtime hard. Maybe you're not tired yet. Maybe you're worried about missing something. Maybe the bedtime routine doesn't work for you. And we'd figure out a way to help your bodies and minds get ready for sleep without it being a battle. The triplets looked at each other, then at their father, then back at Kalisha. She's different, Daddy, Ethan whispered loudly. She listens to our words, Oliver added. Caleb stepped closer, studying Kalisha's face with the intensity of a judge. Are you going to try to change us? The question hung in the air, loaded with the weight of 12 failed relationships. 12 attempts by adults to force them into molds that didn't fit. No, Kalisha said simply. I'm going to try to understand you. And then I'm going to help you become the best versions of yourselves, not different versions. Harrison cleared his throat. Boys, why don't you go, play quietly while Miss Williams and I— Can we show her our fort first? Ethan asked, bouncing on his toes with sudden enthusiasm. If she wants to see it, Harrison said carefully, clearly uncertain about this development. I'd love to see your fort, Kalisha said, standing. What followed was a tour of the most elaborate blanket fort she'd ever seen. Constructed in what appeared to be a formal dining room that had been completely transformed into a child's paradise. Chairs, tables, couch cushions, and approximately 17 different blankets had been engineered into a multi-level structure with distinct rooms, tunnels, and what Oliver proudly announced was an emergency exit. "This is incredible," Kalisha said, genuinely impressed. "Who designed the architecture?" "Caleb draws the plans," Ethan explained. "Oliver figures out the engineering, and I do the decorating. We each have our own room inside," Oliver added, pointing to 3 distinct sections. "But we can visit each other through the tunnels." Kalisha noticed Harrison watching from the doorway, his expression shifting from exhaustion to something approaching wonder as he saw his son's creation through a stranger's eyes. "This isn't just a fort," she said. "This is a home. You built yourselves a space that works exactly the way you need it to work. The nannies always made us take it down," Caleb said quietly. "They said it was messy. But we put it back up every time," Ethan added defiantly. "Of course you did," Kalisha said. "This is important to you. This is your space, your creation, your sanctuary. Why would you let someone take that away?" For the first time since she'd arrived, all 3 boys smiled at her simultaneously. Genuine, unguarded smiles that transformed their faces from suspicious little warriors into the children they actually were. Harrison stepped forward. "Boys, can you show Miss Williams your rooms while I make some phone calls?" As they led her deeper into the penthouse, chattering excitedly about secret passages and hidden treasure, which turned out to be a stash of graham crackers in Oliver's sock drawer. Kalisha began to understand what had really been happening here. These weren't problem children. These were smart, creative, emotionally intelligent children who'd been treated like problems. They'd been acting out because no one had been listening in, and their increasingly elaborate schemes weren't destructive. They were communicative. They were trying to tell every adult who walked through their door, "This is who we are. Accept us or leave us, but stop trying to change us." By the time Harrison found them an hour later, Kalisha was sitting in the middle of the blanket fort, listening intently as Caleb explained the complex political system they'd established for fort governance, while Ethan braided her hair and Oliver demonstrated his technique for making the perfect pillow throne. "Miss Williams," Harrison's voice was carefully controlled. "Could I speak with you privately?" She extricated herself from the fort, leaving the boys to debate whether graham crackers or goldfish crackers made better diplomatic gifts, and followed Harrison to what appeared to be his home office. "I have to ask," he said, closing the door behind them. "What's your secret? In 12 years of parenting, including 7 years solo, I've never seen them warm up to someone that quickly." "There's no secret," Kalisha said. "I just listened to what they were actually saying instead of focusing on how they were saying it." Harrison sank into his desk chair, looking older than his years. 12 nannies, Kalisha. 12 trained, experienced professionals. Some with decades of experience. And you walk in here and within an hour, they're braiding your hair and explaining their governmental systems. "Maybe that's the problem," she said gently. "They don't need a professional. They need someone who sees them as people instead of problems to be solved." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with the same intensity his son Caleb had shown. "The job is yours if you want it," he said finally. "Same terms the agency discussed, though I'm willing to negotiate if you have concerns." "I want it," Kalisha said without hesitation. "But I need you to understand something first." "What's that?" "If you hire me, things are going to change around here. Not just for the boys, but for all of you. I won't just be managing their behavior. I'll be helping them grow into who they're meant to become. That might look different from what you're expecting." Harrison's smile was tired but genuine. After 6 months of chaos, different sounds like exactly what we need. As if summoned by some parental sixth sense, the sound of the boys' voices echoed from down the hallway. Not shouting or fighting, but singing. Actually singing. Some song they'd apparently made up about fort construction that involved surprisingly sophisticated rhyme schemes. "When can you start?" Harrison asked. "How about now?" Kalisha replied. "It sounds like your sons are working on their next masterpiece, and I'd hate to miss the creative process." Harrison's laugh was the first genuine sound of joy she'd heard from him all day. "Welcome to the Reed family, Kalisha. I hope you know what you're getting yourself into." As they walked back toward the blanket fort and the sound of three little voices creating their own world, Kalisha realized she was about to find out exactly what she'd bargained for. She had a feeling it was going to be the adventure of a lifetime. 3 weeks into her new life as the Reed family's live-in caregiver, Kalisha thought she'd seen every possible combination of triplet chaos. She was wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning that had begun deceptively peaceful. The boys had eaten breakfast without incident. Actual breakfast, not their preferred combination of sugar and rebellion. They'd gotten dressed in matching outfits without the usual negotiations about why pants were necessary. They'd even brushed their teeth without turning the bathroom into a foam party. Kalisha should have known they were planning something. She was in the kitchen, preparing snacks for their afternoon park visit, when the suspicious silence hit. Every parent knew that silence. The kind that meant children were either asleep or orchestrating something that would require professional cleaning services. "Boys," she called, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What are you up to?" No answer. Not even the shuffle of little feet or whispered plotting. Complete, ominous silence. She found them in Harrison's home office. The scene was like something from a heist movie, if heist movies featured 5-year-old criminals in dinosaur t-shirts. Ethan was standing on Harrison's leather desk chair, carefully removing books from the highest shelf with the focused determination of someone much older. Oliver was arranging the books in precise stacks on the floor, creating what appeared to be stepping stones. And Caleb, the mastermind himself, was seated in Harrison's executive chair, which he'd somehow adjusted to its highest setting, typing on the computer with the focused intensity of a tiny CEO. "Gentlemen," Kalisha said from the doorway, keeping her voice calm despite the minor heart attack she was experiencing. "This looks like an interesting project. Mind sharing what you're working on?" 3 guilty faces turned toward her, but instead of the defiant expressions she'd expected, she saw excitement barely contained by the knowledge that they might be in trouble. "We're helping Daddy," Ethan announced, climbing down from the chair with careful precision. "He's very stressed," Oliver added, abandoning his book-stacking project. "We heard him on the phone last night talking about the big meeting today." Kalisha's heart rate slowed slightly. Not destruction assistance. Misguided, potentially catastrophic assistance, but assistance nonetheless. "What kind of help were you planning to provide?" she asked, moving closer to see what Caleb had been typing. Caleb spun the chair around to face her, his small hands folded like a miniature executive. "We wrote an email to his business friends to tell them Daddy is the best businessman and they should give him all the money for his project." Kalisha looked at the computer screen and felt her blood pressure spike. The email was addressed to what appeared to be Harrison's entire board of directors, plus several major investors, plus, oh no, the mayor and what looked like a local news reporter. The subject line read, "My daddy is the best businessman ever, and you should listen to him." The message itself was a masterpiece of 5-year-old logic. "Dear business friends, my daddy Harrison Reed is the smartest daddy in the whole world, and he builds really good buildings, and he makes lots of money, but he shares it with people who need help, and he reads us bedtime stories, and he makes the best pancakes on Saturdays, And one time he scared away a spider for us even though he was scared too, but he did it anyway because he loves us. He wants to build something really important today, and you should say yes because he is good at building things, and also he gives the best hugs and he never lies to us, and he always keeps his promises even when it's hard. We love our daddy and you should trust him because we are very smart and we know good people and bad people and daddy is the best people. Love, Ethan and Oliver and Caleb Reed age 5. P.S. Miss Kalisha says we should always say please and thank you, so please give daddy the money and thank you for reading our letter. P.P.S. If you are mean to our daddy, we will put glitter in your car. The email was currently sitting in the drafts folder, but Kalisha could see that Caleb had figured out how to add recipients and was clearly planning to hit send. This is... She paused, trying to find words that wouldn't discourage their obvious love for their father, while also preventing what could be a career-ending moment. This is the sweetest thing I've ever read. All three boys beamed. But, she continued gently, business emails are a little different from family letters. They have special rules. What kind of rules? Caleb asked, his curious mind immediately engaged. Well, business friends like to use different words than family words. And they like to know about projects and numbers instead of pancakes and hugs. But pancakes and hugs are more important, Oliver protested. You're absolutely right, Kalisha agreed. But business friends sometimes need time to understand that. And sending them surprise emails might make them confused instead of helpful. Ethan's face fell. So we can't help Daddy. The disappointment in his voice was heartbreaking, made worse by the knowledge that their instincts were perfect. Harrison was stressed about today's board meeting, and their desire to support him came from a place of pure love. We can absolutely help Daddy, Kalisha said, sitting on the edge of the desk so she could look them all in the eye. But let's think of ways to help that won't accidentally make his job harder. Like what? Caleb asked, already problem-solving. Before Kalisha could answer, the sound of Harrison's key in the front door echoed through the penthouse. He was home early from his morning meetings, which meant the afternoon board presentation was approaching. Daddy! All three boys shouted in unison, abandoning the office to swarm their father at the entrance. Kalisha quickly saved the draft email and minimized the screen, making a mental note to delete it later. She could hear Harrison's tired voice greeting the boys, asking about their morning, trying to inject energy he clearly didn't have into his responses. When she emerged from the office, she found him in the living room, still in his business suit but loosened at the collar, with Ethan on his lap, Oliver leaning against his left shoulder, and Caleb standing beside his chair like a tiny bodyguard. How did the morning meetings go? She asked, noting the tension around his eyes. About as expected, Harrison replied, his voice carefully neutral in the way parents used when they didn't want to worry their children. The afternoon presentation is the main event. We wanted to help you, Ethan announced. We wrote a letter to your business friends to tell them you're the best. Harrison's eyes shot to Kalisha over the boys' heads, a flash of panic crossing his features. It was very sweet, she said quickly, but we decided that business letters need different words than family letters. The relief in Harrison's expression was immediate. What did you have in mind? Well, Kalisha said, settling into the chair across from them. What if we created a good luck ritual? Something special that would help Daddy feel confident and strong before his big meeting. Like a superhero transformation, Oliver exclaimed. Or a magic spell, Ethan added. Caleb considered this with his usual seriousness. What kind of ritual? The kind that reminds Daddy how much he's loved and how many people believe in him, Kalisha said, watching Harrison's face soften as he realized where this was heading. What followed was 45 minutes of the most elaborate pre-meeting preparation ritual in corporate history. The boys insisted Harrison needed a power tie, They chose his brightest blue one because blue is strong like the ocean. Courage cologne. They sprayed him with approximately half a bottle of his expensive aftershave, and Victory hair, which involved Ethan very seriously smoothing down a cowlick with his tiny hands. But the most important part was the speech. Standing in front of their father, the three boys took turns offering their contributions to his confidence. "You build the best buildings," Ethan said solemnly, "and everyone should listen to your ideas. You're brave like a dragon fighter," Oliver added, "and you never give up even when things are hard. You take care of us and lots of other people," Caleb finished, "and that makes you a good leader." Then, in a moment that made Kailash's throat tight with emotion, all three boys wrapped their arms around Harrison in a group hug and whispered, "We love you, Daddy. You can do anything." Harrison's eyes were suspiciously bright when they finally released him. "Thank you, boys. This is exactly what I needed. Will you tell us what happens?" Ethan asked as Harrison gathered his briefcase and presentation materials. "Every detail," Harrison promised. "When I get home, we'll have a celebration dinner. Whether we're celebrating success or celebrating that I tried my best." What do you think this moment means for Harrison's confidence going into his big presentation? Drop a comment about how you think the boys' support will affect the outcome. As Harrison headed toward the door, Caleb suddenly broke away from his brothers and ran after his father. "Daddy, wait." Harrison turned, crouching down to Caleb's level. "What is it, buddy?" Caleb whispered something in Harrison's ear, so quietly that neither Kailasha nor the other boys could hear. Whatever he said made Harrison's entire demeanor shift. His shoulders straightened, his jaw set with determination, and when he stood, he looked like a man ready to conquer the world. "Thank you, Caleb," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll remember that." After Harrison left, Kailasha tried to get the boys back into their normal routine, but she could feel their nervous energy. They loved their father fiercely, and even at 5 years old, they understood that today was important to him. "Miss Kailasha," Oliver said during their afternoon snack, "what if the business friends say no to Daddy?" "Then Daddy will make a new plan," she replied honestly. "Sometimes the first plan doesn't work, but that doesn't mean we stop trying." "Will he be sad?" Ethan asked. "He might be disappointed for a little while," Kailasha said. "But do you know what won't change?" "What?" all three boys asked together. "How much he loves you, and how proud he is to be your daddy, and how hard he'll keep working to take care of our family." "Our family," Caleb repeated, catching the word choice. Kailasha felt heat rise in her cheeks. After only 3 weeks, she was already thinking of them as our family instead of their family. The boys had gotten under her skin in the best possible way, and Harrison was becoming something she wasn't ready to name. "Yes," she said simply. "Our family." The boys exchanged one of their silent communication looks, and she could practically see them filing this information away for future consideration. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. They built an addition to the blanket fort, a victory room, for when Daddy came home with good news. They made cookies shaped like buildings, Oliver's idea, and surprisingly architectural for 5-year-old cookie decorating. They practiced their welcome home dance, Ethan's contribution, involving a lot of spinning and jazz hands. But as 5 o'clock approached, the time when Harrison usually returned from the office, the boys grew restless. They took turns looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows, as if they could summon their father through sheer will. 6 o'clock came and went. Then 7. "Where is Daddy?" Oliver asked, pressed against the window like a tiny sentinel. "He's probably still in his meeting," Kailasha said, though she was beginning to worry too. Harrison always called if he was going to be late. Always. What if they said no and he's sad and he doesn't want to come home? Ethan asked, voicing the fear they were all feeling. Before Kailasha could respond, Caleb walked over to Harrison's desk. The same desk where they'd planned their email mission that morning, and picked up the phone. "Caleb, what are you doing?" "Calling Daddy," he said matter-of-factly, pressing buttons with the confidence of someone who'd watched adults use phones and had figured out the system. "Buddy, I don't think." But the call connected, and suddenly Harrison's voice filled the room through the speakerphone. "Harrison Reed's office. This is Harrison." "Daddy!" all three boys shouted, clustering around the phone. "Boys!" Harrison's voice carried surprise and something else. Exhaustion? Relief? "How did you never mind? Is everything okay? Is Miss Kalisha there?" "We're here," Kalisha said, moving closer to the phone. "We were just wondering when you might be home. The boys made you victory cookies. And we practiced our dance," Ethan added. "And we built you a victory room in the fort," Oliver chimed in. There was a long pause, and when Harrison spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I'm on my way home right now. And boys, we're definitely going to need that victory room." The line went dead, leaving them staring at each other with mounting excitement. "He sounded happy," Caleb observed with his usual careful analysis. "He sounded like he has good news," Oliver agreed. "He sounded like he needs his victory cookies," Ethan declared, already heading toward the kitchen. 20 minutes later, they heard Harrison's key in the door, and 3 small bodies launched themselves toward the entrance like guided missiles. "Daddy!" But this time, when Harrison scooped them into his arms, his smile was different. Broader, more genuine, lit from within by something that hadn't been there that morning. "So," Kalisha asked, hanging back to give the family their moment, "how did it go?" Harrison set the boys down but kept them close, his hands on their shoulders as he looked at Kalisha with an expression of wonder. "They said yes," he said simply. "All of it. The housing development, the community center, the affordable housing initiative. Everything." The boys erupted in cheers, though Kalisha suspected they understood more about their father's happiness than the specifics of his business success. "But that's not the best part," Harrison continued, his eyes finding hers across the room. "Do you know what Caleb whispered to me before I left?" Kalisha shook her head. Harrison looked down at his youngest son, who was beaming with quiet pride. "He said, 'Daddy, remember that you already have everything you need. The business friends just need to see it too.'" "And did they?" Kalisha asked softly. "They did," Harrison replied. "When I walked into that boardroom, I wasn't thinking about profit margins or return on investments. I was thinking about building something that would make my sons proud. Something that would help families like ours, like all of ours, have safe places to live and grow." He paused, his gaze moving between Kalisha and the boys. "I was thinking about what home really means." As the boys dragged their father toward the kitchen to show off their architectural cookie creations, Kalisha lingered in the entryway, processing what had just happened. This wasn't just about a successful business presentation. This was about a man who'd found his center again, grounded by the love of his children and the support of someone who believed in him not because of his wealth or success, but because of his character. And as she watched Harrison listen with complete attention to Ethan's explanation of why building-shaped cookies were aerodynamically superior to regular round cookies, she realized something that made her heart race and her palms sweat. She was falling in love with all 4 of them, the boys who'd chosen to trust her and the man who'd let her into their world. The question was, what was she going to do about it? 2 months had passed since the victory celebration, and Kalisha had settled into the rhythm of the Reed family like she'd always belonged there. The boys had stopped testing her boundaries and started including her in their elaborate schemes. A promotion she wasn't entirely sure was an improvement. Harrison had begun lingering over morning coffee, their conversations stretching from logistics about the boys' schedules to discussions about everything from architecture to childhood dreams. It felt like home. which was exactly the problem. The realization hit her on a Thursday morning while she was helping Ethan tie his shoes for school picture day. He was chattering about his plans to be a builder like Daddy when he grew up, while Oliver practiced his picture smile in the mirror and Caleb organized his backpack with military precision. "Miss Kalisha?" Ethan asked, looking up from his sneakers with serious 5-year-old eyes. "Are you going to stay with us forever?" The question was innocent enough, the kind children asked when they felt secure and happy. But it landed in Kalisha's chest like a stone, because she'd been asking herself the same thing lately, and the answer scared her. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" She deflected, focusing intently on the double knot. "Tommy at school says nannies always leave eventually." Oliver supplied helpfully from his position at the mirror. "His family has had 8 nannies, and they all went away." "But you're different," Caleb added with his usual quiet intensity. "You're not just our nanny. You're our Kalisha." "They're Kalisha." The possessive pronoun wrapped around her heart and squeezed, because she was theirs in ways that went far beyond her job description. These boys had become her world, their happiness her primary concern, their father. Their father had become something she couldn't afford to think about too deeply. "I'm not planning on going anywhere," she said, which was true but incomplete. Planning and wanting were two different things, and what she wanted was starting to feel impossible. "Good," Ethan declared with 5-year-old finality. "Because we love you and Daddy smiles more now and we're a family." There it was again. Family. The word that had been circling their conversations more frequently, spoken with casual certainty by the boys and careful neutrality by the adults, as if they were all pretending not to notice how naturally it had started to fit. "All right, picture-perfect shoes achieved," Kalisha announced, stepping back to admire her work. "Who's ready for breakfast?" The morning routine proceeded normally, if normal could be applied to a household where breakfast conversations regularly included debates about whether superheroes would make good architects and why cereal commercials were clearly designed to trick kids. Harrison emerged from his home office looking polished and professional, but Kalisha had learned to read the subtle signs of his moods. The way he rolled his shoulders when he was stressed, the slight tightening around his eyes when he was worried, the genuine smile that transformed his entire face when he looked at his sons. Today, she noticed, he seemed distracted. Not stressed exactly, but preoccupied in a way that made her stomach flutter with unease. "Big day?" she asked, refilling his coffee cup while the boys debated the structural integrity of Waffle Towers. "Board meeting this afternoon," he replied, but his tone was strange. "Careful. Nothing urgent, just quarterly reviews and planning discussions." Something in his voice made her look up sharply, but he was already turning his attention to Oliver's waffle architecture, praising the engineering while gently suggesting that eating might. After Harrison left for the office and the boys departed for kindergarten, still a miracle that required daily celebration, Kalisha found herself alone in the penthouse with her thoughts. She tried to focus on her usual tasks, meal planning, laundry, organizing the boys' ever-expanding art collection, but her mind kept circling back to that strange note in Harrison's voice. She was folding tiny t-shirts when her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Denise. "Girl, you've been in that fancy penthouse for 2 months and we've barely heard from you. Everything okay?" Kalisha stared at the message, realizing with a pang of guilt that she'd been so absorbed in her new life that she'd neglected her old one. Her family, her friends, the community center where she'd volunteered. All of it felt like pieces of someone else's life now. She was typing a response when another text came through, this one from her mother. "Kalisha, baby, I'm proud of you for taking that job, but don't forget where you come from. Rich folks' problems aren't your problems. Guard your heart. Guard your heart. Too late for that advice, Mama." The boys returned from kindergarten in their usual whirlwind of excitement and chaos, full of stories about their day and plans for their afternoon. But Kalisha found herself watching them with new eyes, seeing not just the children she'd grown to love, but the children who belonged to a world she could never truly be part of. "Miss Kalisha, you seem sad," Caleb observed during snack time, his perceptive gaze fixed on her face. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about grown-up things." "Boring grown-up things or important grown-up things?" Oliver asked, ever the practical one. "Both," she admitted, which made all three boys nod with understanding. They'd learned that grown-ups often had to think about boring important things. The afternoon passed quietly. They worked on a puzzle, read stories, and started planning their weekend adventure to the Children's Museum. Normal activities that felt suddenly precious, as if she were seeing them through the lens of potential loss. Harrison returned earlier than usual, arriving home at 4:30 with the same distracted energy he'd carried that morning. The boys swarmed him as always, but Kalisha noticed how his hugs lingered a little longer, how his attention seemed more focused on memorizing their faces. "How was the board meeting?" she asked when the boys had been distracted by a new set of building blocks Harrison had brought home. "Fine," he said, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. "Actually, could we talk? After the boys are in bed." Her stomach dropped. In her experience, "We need to talk" conversations never ended well, especially when delivered in that carefully neutral tone. "Of course," she managed. The evening routine felt surreal. Bath time giggles, bedtime stories, goodnight kisses. All of it performed with the shadow of unknown change hanging over them. The boys sensed something too. They were clingier than usual, requesting extra stories and more water, and just one more hug. Finally, at 8:30, the penthouse settled into quiet. Kalisha found Harrison in his office, sitting behind his desk with a glass of whiskey he wasn't drinking and an expression she couldn't read. "Sit, please," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. She perched on the edge of the seat, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. "Is everything all right?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Regret, longing, and a kind of resigned sadness that spoke of decisions already made. "The board meeting today wasn't just about quarterly reviews," he said finally. "They've been watching my situation at home. The nanny turnover, the media attention from some of the boys' more creative public outings, the way my personal life has been affecting my professional schedule." Kalisha's chest tightened. And they've made some recommendations about stability, professional image, the importance of maintaining clear boundaries between personal and professional responsibilities. What kind of recommendations? Though she was beginning to suspect she already knew. Harrison's jaw tightened. "They think I should consider a more traditional arrangement. A live-out nanny, perhaps someone older, with more formal credentials. Someone who can provide childcare without." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Without getting too involved," Kalisha finished quietly. "Without becoming family." "Kalisha, they think I'm inappropriate." It wasn't a question. She'd known this day would come eventually. A young black woman living in a wealthy white man's home, caring for his children, becoming part of their family in ways that made other wealthy white people uncomfortable. The story was as old as it was predictable. "They think the situation is complicated," Harrison said carefully. "And they're not wrong." The admission hung between them like a confession. Because it was complicated. The way she'd started looking forward to Harrison's smile in the morning, the way her heart raced when he lingered over coffee to talk with her, the way she'd begun to think of this penthouse not as her workplace, but as her home. "So what are you saying?" she asked, though she already knew. Harrison stood, pacing to the window that overlooked the city lights. I'm saying that my board controls not just my business decisions, but my personal ones too, apparently. I'm saying that I've built my entire life around other people's expectations, and now those expectations are threatening the happiness of the people I care about most. The boys will be devastated, Kalisha said, focusing on them because thinking about her own devastation felt too overwhelming. I know. His voice cracked slightly. They've finally found stability, finally stopped expecting every adult in their lives to disappear, and now you have to prove to your board that you can prioritize business over family. Harrison turned from the window, his eyes blazing with frustration. I don't want to do this, Kalisha. But if I lose the board's confidence, I lose everything. The business, the foundation, the affordable housing projects, all of it. And without that, you can't provide for the boys, she finished. I understand. Do you think Harrison is making the right choice by prioritizing his board's demands over his family's happiness? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you? Harrison crossed the room, stopping in front of her chair. Because I'm not sure I understand it myself. I'm 42 years old, and I'm still making decisions based on what other people think I should do instead of what I know is right. The pain in his voice made her want to reach for him, to offer comfort, to tell him they'd figure it out together. But that was exactly the problem, wasn't it? There was no together for them, not really. There never had been. When? She asked instead. They want the transition to be gradual. A few weeks to find the right replacement. Time for the boys to adjust. No. Kalisha stood, her decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. If this is happening, it needs to happen quickly. Dragging it out will only make it harder for everyone, especially the boys. Kalisha, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She squared her shoulders, drawing on reserves of strength she'd built during a lifetime of disappointments. This isn't just about your board's comfort level or my employment. This is about 3 little boys who've already lost too many people they've trusted. If I'm leaving, I need to leave in a way that doesn't shatter their faith in adults. Harrison stared at her, and she saw the moment he realized what she was really saying. You're going to tell them this was your choice. I'm going to tell them that sometimes people we love have to make difficult decisions, and that love means wanting what's best for each other even when it hurts. That's not fair to you. Fair stopped being relevant the moment I fell in love with them, Kalisha said, the admission slipping out before she could stop it. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to address. Because if she'd fallen in love with the boys, what did that say about what she felt for their father? Harrison took a step closer, close enough that she could see the storm brewing in his gray eyes. Kalisha, don't. She held up a hand, stopping him. Whatever you're thinking of saying, don't. It'll only make this harder. It's already hard. It's already impossible. The raw honesty in his voice nearly broke her resolve. She could see it in his face, the same feelings she was fighting, the same impossible longing for a future that couldn't exist. I know, she whispered, but impossible is still impossible, no matter how much we might want it to be different. They stood there in the quiet of his office, 2 people who'd found something beautiful and were being forced to let it go before it could fully bloom. The space between them felt charged with everything they couldn't say, everything they couldn't have. Finally, Harrison stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. How do you want to handle telling the boys? Let me think about it tonight, Kalisha said. I'll talk to them tomorrow after school. Give them the weekend to start processing before the new nanny starts. The board has some candidates in mind. Very qualified, excellent references. I'm sure they're perfect, Kalisha said, though the words tasted bitter. Perfect on paper, acceptable to the board, safe in all the ways that she apparently wasn't. As she turned to leave his office, Harrison's voice stopped her. For what it's worth, these have been the best 2 months of my life. Not because of the board approval or the business success, but because for the first time in years, my house felt like a home. Kalisha didn't trust herself to respond. Instead, she walked out of his office and down the hallway to her own room. The space that had become her sanctuary, filled with gifts from the boys, photos of their adventures, evidence of the life she'd built here. Tomorrow, she would have to start saying goodbye to all of it. Tonight, she would allow herself to grieve for the family she'd found and lost, and the love she'd never been allowed to claim. As she sat on her bed, surrounded by the remnants of the best job she'd ever had, Kalisha realized that the boys had been right about one thing. She wasn't just their nanny. She was their Kalisha. And after tomorrow, she'd have to figure out how to be herself again without them. The thought was more terrifying than she wanted to admit. The conversation with the boys went worse than Kalisha had imagined, and she'd imagined it going pretty terribly. She'd planned it carefully, Saturday afternoon, after their trip to the park, when they were tired enough to be calm, but not so tired they'd be emotional. She'd prepared explanations about how sometimes grown-ups had to make changes, about how much she loved them, about how they'd always be special to her. She hadn't prepared for the silence. 3 little boys sat on the couch in their blanket fort, staring at her with identical expressions of betrayal and disbelief. No tears, no protests, no bargaining, just devastating, crushing silence. "Do you have questions?" she asked gently, kneeling in front of them. "Anything you want to talk about?" More silence. Ethan picked at a loose thread on his dinosaur shirt. Oliver stared at his hands. Caleb looked directly at her with eyes that seemed far too old for his 5-year-old face. "Boys, I know this is hard." "No, you don't," Caleb said quietly, his first word since she'd started explaining. "If you knew it was hard, you wouldn't do it." The accusation hit her like a physical blow. "Caleb, sometimes adults have to make difficult choices." "The other nannies said that too," Ethan interrupted, still not looking at her. "They said they had to leave, but really they just wanted to leave." "We thought you were different," Oliver added, his voice. Kalisha felt tears burning behind her eyes. This was exactly what she'd been trying to avoid, making them feel abandoned again, reinforcing their belief that adults couldn't be trusted to stay. "I am different," she said urgently. "I don't want to leave. I love being your family." "Then don't go," Caleb said with devastating simplicity. "If you love us, don't go." How could she explain to 5-year-olds that love sometimes meant leaving? That staying would create complications that could hurt their father's career and, by extension, hurt them? That the world had rules about women like her and families like theirs, rules that weren't fair, but were still real? Sometimes loving someone means doing what's best for them, even when it hurts, she tried. "That's stupid," Ethan declared, finally looking up at her with tear-filled eyes. "If it hurts, it's not good." Before Kalisha could respond, the sound of Harrison's key in the front door echoed through the penthouse. He was returning from his morning meetings earlier than expected, and she realized with sinking dread that he was about to walk into the aftermath of her conversation with the boys. "Daddy," Oliver called, but it wasn't his usual enthusiastic greeting. It was the call of a child seeking rescue. Harrison appeared in the living room doorway, took one look at the scene, 3 solemn boys, Kalisha kneeling in front of them with obvious distress, and immediately understood. "You told them," he said quietly. "Miss Kalisha is leaving us," Caleb announced, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. "Just like all the others." Harrison's face went through several expressions: pain, guilt, frustration, and something that looked like desperation. "Boys, it's complicated. Everything is always complicated when grown-ups want to do something we don't like," Ethan said, his 5-year-old logic cutting straight to the heart of the matter. The boys stood up from the couch in unison, a coordinated movement that Kalisha recognized as preparation for one of their strategic maneuvers. But instead of plotting mischief, they walked past both adults and headed toward their bedrooms. "Where are you going?" Harrison called after them. "To pack," Caleb said without turning around. "If Miss Kalisha is leaving, then we should probably get ready for the next nanny to leave too." The bedroom doors closed with identical soft clicks, leaving Kalisha and Harrison alone in the living room that had become a battlefield. "That went well," Harrison said grimly, running his hands through his hair. "They'll adjust," Kalisha said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "Children are resilient." "Are they?" "Because I'm starting to think that's just something adults tell themselves to feel better about the damage we do." Before Kalisha could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed her sister Denise, and for a moment she considered ignoring it. But she needed the distraction, needed to hear a voice from the world beyond this penthouse of heartbreak. "Hey, Denise," she answered, stepping toward the window. "Girl, finally. I've been trying to reach you for days. Listen, I have news. Remember Marcus Johnson from church? He's been asking about you, and I may have given him your number. Don't be mad, but he's really interested in taking you out, and honestly, it's about time you started dating someone in your own league instead of getting all starry-eyed over some rich white man who's never going to." "Denise, I can't talk right now," Kalisha interrupted, acutely aware of Harrison standing 10 feet away, pretending not to listen. "Why not? What's wrong? You sound weird." "I'm at work." "Since when do you not talk to family during work? That man has you walking on eggshells, doesn't he? I knew this job was too good to be true. Rich folks always think they own people just because they pay them well." Kalisha closed her eyes, feeling the familiar frustration that came with trying to explain her complicated life to people who saw everything in black and white. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've gotten so caught up in playing house with someone else's family that you've forgotten your real family. Mama's been worried sick, and we barely see you anymore. I've been busy." "Too busy for your own sister? Too busy to return phone calls or visit on your days off? Girl, you're living in a fantasy. That man and those kids aren't your family. They're your job, and the sooner you remember that, the better." The words hit harder than they should have, partly because there was truth in them and partly because Harrison was hearing every syllable. Kalisha glanced at him and saw his jaw tighten, his expression carefully blank in the way it got when he was hurt, but trying not to show it. "I have to go," she said into the phone. "Kalisha, don't hang up on me. I'm trying to help you see." She ended the call and stood in the silence that followed, feeling the weight of Harrison's gaze and the echo of her sister's words. "Your family thinks I'm taking advantage of you," Harrison said finally. It wasn't a question. "My family thinks a lot of things," Kalisha replied carefully. "Most of them based on assumptions rather than facts. Are they wrong, though? Have I been taking advantage?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications about their relationship, their feelings, the impossible situation they'd found themselves in. "That depends," Kalisha said, turning to face him fully. "Are you asking as my employer or as what?" The challenge in his voice made her realize they were finally approaching the conversation they'd been avoiding for months. The one about what existed between them beyond their professional relationship and their shared love for the boys. "As the man who looks at me like I matter," she said quietly. "As the man who asks my opinion about everything from business decisions to bedtime routines. As the man who's been making me feel like I belong somewhere for the first time in my life." Harrison took a step closer, his professional mask finally slipping completely. "You do matter. More because I don't have a choice." The words exploded out of him with more force than either of them expected. "Because if I lose the board's support, I lose everything that allows me to take care of my sons. Because I'm a single father trying to navigate a world that judges my every decision, and I can't afford to make choices based on what I want instead of what's practical. What do you want? Kalisha asked, stepping closer despite every instinct telling her to maintain distance. Harrison stared at her for a long moment, and she could see the war playing out in his gray eyes. Responsibility against desire, practicality against possibility. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're here, he said finally. I want to come home to you and the boys every night. I want to stop pretending that what I feel for you is professional appreciation when it's so much more than that. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they should cross. Harrison. She started, but he wasn't finished. I want to be able to tell my board that my personal life is none of their business and mean it. I want to be the kind of man who fights for what matters instead of giving in to what's expected. I want to be worthy of the way you look at me, the way the boys trust me, the way you've made this house feel like a home. Kalisha felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. And what's stopping you from having all of that? Fear, he said simply. Fear that I'll make the wrong choice and hurt the people I love most. Fear that I'm not strong enough to stand up to the pressure. Fear that I'll lose everything and have nothing left to offer you or the boys. What if you're wrong? She asked, closing the remaining distance between them. What if the board doesn't have as much power as you think they do? What if there's a way to fight this without losing everything? What if there isn't? Then at least you'll know you tried. At least you'll be able to tell your son someday that when it mattered, you chose love over fear. Harrison reached up to cup her face in his hands, his thumb brushing across her cheek. When did you become so wise? Somewhere between reading bedtime stories and falling in love with all of you, she whispered. The words hung in the air between them, a confession that changed everything and nothing. Because loving each other didn't solve the practical problems they faced, didn't change the board's demands or society's expectations. But it did clarify what they were fighting for. The boys are right, Harrison said quietly. This is stupid. All of it. The board, the expectations, the idea that we can't choose our own family. What are you saying? Harrison's hands dropped to her shoulders, his grip firm and determined. I'm saying that I've spent my entire adult life building something I thought mattered, and I've just realized that none of it matters if I don't have you and the boys to share it with. Harrison, think about this carefully. I have thought about it. For weeks, I've been lying awake at night thinking about it. And you know what conclusion I keep reaching? What? That the board works for me, not the other way around. That I built Reed Industries from the ground up, and if they don't like my personal choices, they can find another CEO to intimidate. Kalisha stared at him, seeing something in his expression she'd never seen before. Not just determination, but freedom. The freedom that came from finally knowing what was worth fighting for. Are you sure? She asked. Because once you make this choice, there's no going back. They might actually remove you from the board. Let them try, Harrison said, his voice steady and sure. I'd rather be unemployed with a family than successful and alone. What do you think will happen when Harrison stands up to his board? Drop your predictions in the comments below. The sound of small footsteps in the hallway interrupted them, and they stepped apart just as three little faces peered around the corner. Are you fighting? Oliver asked in a small voice. Because if you're fighting about Miss Kalisha leaving, we have something to say, Ethan added with the solemnity of someone about to deliver important news. Caleb stepped forward, holding a piece of paper covered in crayon drawings and painstakingly printed letters. We wrote you a letter. Harrison knelt down to their level, accepting the paper with the reverence it deserved. Kalisha read over his shoulder as he examined their artwork, 3 stick figures labeled Ethan, Oliver, and Caleb holding hands with 2 taller figures labeled Daddy and Miss Kalisha. Above them, in Caleb's careful printing, were the words, Our family. We decided, Ethan announced, that if grown-ups can make choices, then kids can too. And we choose our family, Oliver added, moving to stand beside Kalisha and taking her hand. All of our family, Caleb finished, taking Harrison's hand and completing their circle. Kalisha felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at the three little boys who'd changed her life, and the man who'd made her believe in possibilities she'd never dared to dream. So what do you say, Daddy? Ethan asked. Are you going to choose our family too? Harrison looked around the circle they'd formed. His sons, the woman who'd become essential to all their happiness, the family they'd created together despite every obstacle. Yes, he said, his voice strong and certain. I choose our family. All of us, together, whatever comes next. As the boys erupted in cheers and threw themselves into a group hug that nearly knocked them all over, Kalisha realized that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought in boardrooms or courtrooms. Sometimes they were fought in living rooms, by people who loved each other enough to risk everything for the chance to stay together. The real question was whether love would be enough to overcome everything. Monday morning arrived with the weight of revolution hanging in the air. Harrison stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. Today, he would walk into his own boardroom and tell 12 of the most powerful people in the city that their opinions about his personal life were irrelevant. He should have been terrified. Instead, he felt more centered than he had in years. The smell of pancakes drifted from the kitchen. Kalisha's Saturday special extended to Monday because, as Ethan had pointed out over breakfast, Revolution pancakes were clearly superior to regular weekday pancakes. The boys had declared themselves part of Operation Keep Our Family, complete with hand-drawn battle plans that involved strategic hugging and what Oliver called cute warfare. Daddy! Caleb appeared in the bedroom doorway, dressed for kindergarten but wearing a tie that matched Harrison's. We're ready for the mission. Harrison knelt down to adjust his son's tie, marveling at the fierce determination in those 5-year-old eyes. You know this might be difficult, right? The board might not understand at first. Then we'll help them understand, Ethan said, appearing beside his brother with military precision. We're very good at explaining things. We've been practicing, Oliver added, joining the formation. Miss Kalisha taught us about professional presentation skills. Harrison felt a surge of love so strong it nearly knocked him over. These 3 little boys were ready to march into battle for their family, armed with nothing but conviction and kindergarten-level PowerPoint skills. What did I do to deserve you 3? He asked, pulling them into a group hug. You chose us, Caleb said simply, and we chose you back. The elevator ride to the Reed Industries executive floor felt like ascending to a different kind of battle than Harrison had ever fought. Usually, he entered boardrooms thinking about profit margins, market projections, and shareholder value. Today, he was thinking about bedtime stories, blanket forts, and the woman who'd taught his sons that love was something worth fighting for. The boys had insisted on coming with him, despite Kalisha's concerns about disrupting a business meeting. It's not just his meeting, Ethan had pointed out with 5-year-old logic. It's about our family, so we should be there too. Margaret Chun, his longtime assistant, did a double take when Harrison emerged from the elevator with 3 small boys in matching ties and identical expressions of determination. Mr. Reed, the board is expecting you, but... She glanced at the boys uncertainly. The boys will be joining us today, Harrison said calmly. Family meeting. Margaret's eyebrows shot up, but she'd worked for Harrison long enough to recognize when he'd made up his mind about something. Shall I set up additional chairs? Please. And Margaret, whatever happens in there today, I want you to know that working with you has been one of the highlights of my career. Her expression softened. Sir, are you expecting this meeting to go badly? I'm expecting it to go honestly, Harrison replied. Sometimes that's the same thing. The boardroom fell silent when Harrison entered with his 3 sons. 12 faces turned toward them with expressions ranging from confusion to outright disapproval. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Richard Blackwell, the board chairman whose disapproval of Harrison's domestic situation had sparked this entire confrontation. "Harrison," Richard said carefully, "we weren't expecting additional attendees." "Gentlemen," Harrison said, settling into his usual seat while the boys arranged themselves in the child-sized chairs Margaret had quickly provided. "I'd like to introduce my sons, Ethan, Oliver, and Caleb Reed. They have something they'd like to share with you." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Harrison could practically hear the board members' collective thoughts. Has he lost his mind? Caleb stood up, pulling out a piece of poster board covered in crayon drawings and careful 5-year-old handwriting. "We made a presentation," he announced with the seriousness of someone delivering a State of the Union address. Ethan joined his brother, pointing to their artwork. "This is our family. Daddy, me, Oliver, Caleb, and Miss Kalisha. We researched what makes families work, and we have data." Oliver stepped forward with a folder full of papers. "We interviewed our neighbors, our teachers, and Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store. Everyone agrees that families need love, trust, and people who stay even when things are hard." Richard Blackwell cleared his throat. "Boys, this is very creative, but perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue for." "With respect, Mr. Blackwell," Harrison interrupted, "this is exactly the appropriate venue. You called this meeting to discuss my personal life and its impact on my professional performance. My sons are here to provide their perspective on that topic." Caleb unfolded another piece of poster board, this one covered in what appeared to be a very serious chart. "Since Miss Kalisha became our family, Daddy misses fewer meetings because we don't have nanny emergencies. Our house is happier, so Daddy sleeps better and makes better decisions. We haven't had to go to the emergency room once, and Daddy smiles 73% more often." "You measured Daddy's smiles?" asked board member Patricia Williams, her stern expression cracking slightly. "Data is important," Oliver explained solemnly. "We learned that in school." Ethan stepped forward for his part of the presentation. "Also, Miss Kalisha helps Daddy with his work. She reads his speeches and tells him when his business words are too boring. She helps him remember that buildings are for people, not just for money. And," Caleb added, delivering their closing argument, "she makes really good pancakes, which is important for brain development and family happiness." The boardroom was completely silent. 12 of the most powerful businesspeople in the city sat staring at 3 5-year-olds who just delivered the most honest performance review Harrison had ever witnessed. Richard Blackwell was the first to speak. "Boys, that's very thorough research. But there are adult concerns about professional appropriateness and—" "Why?" Oliver interrupted with genuine curiosity. "Why is it inappropriate for our daddy to be happy?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Harrison watched as the board members shifted uncomfortably, suddenly forced to examine the logic behind their objections. "It's not about happiness," another board member, Gerald Morrison, said carefully. "It's about maintaining professional boundaries and ensuring that personal relationships don't interfere with business judgment." Caleb tilted his head, studying Gerald with scientific interest. "Has Daddy made any bad business decisions since Miss Kalisha joined our family?" "Well, no," Gerald admitted reluctantly. "Has he missed important meetings or failed to complete projects?" Ethan asked. "No, but has the company made less money?" Oliver pressed. "Actually, this quarter's profits are up significantly," Patricia Williams said slowly, consulting the papers in front of her. "Then what's the problem?" Caleb asked with devastating 5-year-old logic. Harrison felt a surge of pride watching his sons dismantle the board's arguments with nothing but honest questions and factual observations. These boys were going to be formidable adults someday. Richard Blackwell leaned back in his chair, clearly struggling with how to respond to kindergarten-level cross-examination. The issue isn't performance, boys. It's about appearances. About what people might think or say. What people? Ethan asked. Other business leaders, investors, the media. Do any of those people love our daddy? Oliver asked innocently. That's not relevant. It is relevant, Caleb said firmly. Because we love our daddy, and Miss Kalisha loves our daddy, and daddy loves all of us. That's what families do. If those other people don't love our daddy, why should their opinions matter more than ours? Harrison stood up, placing his hands on his son's shoulders. The moment had come for him to speak his truth. 5 months ago, he began, this board hired a nanny for my children without consulting me, because you were concerned about the instability in my home life affecting my work performance. You were right to be concerned. My sons had driven away 12 caregivers in 6 months, and I was struggling to balance my responsibilities as a father with my duties as CEO. The board members nodded, remembering their frustration with Harrison's constant scheduling conflicts and emergency departures. Then Kalisha Williams volunteered to care for my children. Not because the agency assigned her, not because the salary was attractive, but because she saw 3 brilliant, creative, emotionally intelligent children who were being treated like problems instead of people. Harrison's voice grew stronger as he continued. In 3 months, she's given my son stability, confidence, and the kind of unconditional love that allows children to flourish. She's given me the peace of mind to focus fully on my work, knowing that my children are not just supervised but truly cared for. He looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. But more than that, she's made us a family. Not just a father and his children, but a real family built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. Harrison, Richard said carefully, we understand your gratitude, but... I'm not finished, Harrison interrupted, his voice calm but firm. For the past week, you've been pressuring me to end this arrangement because you're concerned about appearances, about what other people might think, about maintaining some arbitrary standard of professional propriety. The boardroom was completely silent now, every person focused on Harrison's words. Here's what I think, Harrison continued. I think you're afraid. I think you're afraid that if I'm allowed to choose love over convention, other people might start making the same choice. I think you're afraid that if I prioritize my family's happiness over other people's comfort, it might inspire others to question whether your approval is worth sacrificing their own joy. What do you think the board's reaction will be to Harrison's bold statement? Share your thoughts below. Richard Blackwell's face had gone red. Harrison, you're out of line. Am I? Harrison asked. Because last I checked, I own 51% of this company. I built Reed Industries from the ground up, and I've spent 15 years making all of you very wealthy in the process. I've earned the right to choose my own family. Patricia Williams leaned forward. Harrison, we're not saying you can't have a relationship. We're simply suggesting that a live-in arrangement with an employee creates potential complications. Miss Kalisha isn't just an employee, Ethan interjected indignantly. She's our family. She helps us with homework and reads us stories and knows that Oliver doesn't like crusts on his sandwiches, Caleb added. And she makes Daddy laugh even when he's had a hard day, Oliver finished. Harrison knelt down beside his son's chairs. Boys, thank you for your presentation. You did an excellent job, but I need to finish this conversation with the board. The 3 boys nodded solemnly and settled back into their chairs, clearly prepared to stay for the duration of the battle. Harrison stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. 15 years ago, I started this company because I wanted to build something meaningful. Not just profitable, but meaningful. Buildings that would house families, developments that would strengthen communities, projects that would improve people's lives. He turned back to face the board. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that mission. I started building wealth instead of homes, focusing on shareholder value instead of human value. The past few months with Kalisha and my sons have reminded me what I'm actually trying to accomplish. Gerald Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Harrison, your charitable work is admirable, but this isn't about philanthropy, isn't it? Harrison challenged. Because it seems to me that you're asking me to choose between profit and people, between your comfort and my family's happiness. That's exactly the kind of thinking that turns businesses into soulless machines instead of forces for good. He moved back to the head of the table, his presence commanding the room. So here's what's going to happen. Kalisha Williams is staying, not just as my children's caregiver, but as part of our family. If that makes you uncomfortable, you're welcome to find another company to advise. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison could see the board members exchanging glances, calculating risks, considering their options. Finally, Richard Blackwell spoke. Harrison, you're putting us in an impossible position. We have fiduciary responsibilities to the other shareholders. The other shareholders are making record profits, Harrison replied calmly. The affordable housing project I presented last month is generating more positive press than we've had in years. Our community development initiatives are opening doors with city planners that have been closed for decades. Tell me how any of that is threatened by my personal happiness. Patricia Williams consulted her notes. Actually, Richard, he has a point. The company's public image has never been stronger. The media coverage of Harrison's work-life balance initiatives has been overwhelmingly positive. What work-life balance initiatives? Richard asked sharply. Patricia looked surprised. The articles about how Harrison Reed, despite his success, prioritizes family time and maintains a stable home environment for his children. It's been great PR for the company's family-friendly policies. Harrison felt a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He hadn't realized that the media had been paying attention, but apparently his son's occasional appearances at company events and Kalisha's presence at school functions had been noticed. Caleb raised his hand politely. Mr. Blackwell, can I ask you a question? Richard looked startled but nodded. I suppose. Do you have a family? Yes, I have a wife and 2 grown children. Do you love them? Of course. Would you fire yourself from your job if someone told you that loving them was unprofessional? The question hit the boardroom like a bomb. Richard Blackwell stared at the 5-year-old who just exposed the fundamental flaw in his argument with devastating clarity. That's different, Richard said weakly. How? Oliver asked, genuinely curious. Richard looked around the table helplessly, clearly struggling to articulate a difference that made sense even to himself. Gerald Morrison cleared his throat. Richard, perhaps we should consider the practical implications here. Harrison's performance has been exceptional, the company is thriving, and his personal life appears to be stable for the first time in years. Are we really going to jeopardize all of that because we're worried about what people might think? What people think affects our reputation, which affects our business, Richard insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Ethan stood up on his chair, his 5-year-old indignation at full power. You know what I think? I think you're scared that if Daddy shows everyone that families can be different and still be good, then other people might want different families too, and that makes you uncomfortable because you like it better when everyone does the same things. The accuracy of this observation sent a ripple of uncomfortable recognition around the table. Harrison watched as several board members shifted in their seats, clearly recognizing themselves in Ethan's assessment. Patricia Williams was the first to break. You know what? The boy's right. Harrison, your personal life is none of our business as long as it doesn't negatively impact the company. And clearly it hasn't. Patricia, Richard began. No, Richard. We're business advisors, not social arbiters. Our job is to ensure the company's success, and by every metric, the company is more successful now than it was 6 months ago. Gerald Morrison nodded slowly. I have to agree. Harrison, I owe you an apology. We overstepped our bounds. One by one, other board members began to voice their agreement. Harrison watched with amazement as the tide turned, not because of financial projections or strategic arguments, but because 3 5-year-olds had asked the right questions and forced a room full of adults to examine their own motivations. Finally, only Richard Blackwell remained opposed, his face set in stubborn disapproval. Richard, Harrison said quietly, I respect your concerns, but they're not going to change my decision. The question is whether you can accept that and continue to serve on this board, or whether you need to step down. The ultimatum hung in the air. Richard looked around the table, realizing that he was completely isolated in his opposition. Fine, he said finally. But I want it on record that I believe this sets a dangerous precedent for mixing personal and professional boundaries. Noted, Harrison replied calmly. Is there any other business to discuss? As the board members gathered their papers and began to file out, Patricia Williams approached Harrison. For what it's worth, I'm glad you fought for your family. It takes courage to choose love over convention. After the boardroom cleared, Harrison sat alone with his 3 sons, processing what had just happened. Did we win? Oliver asked uncertainly. We won, Harrison confirmed, pulling them all into a huge hug. Does this mean Miss Kalisha gets to stay forever? Ethan asked. It means we get to choose our own family, Caleb said with satisfaction. Just like we wanted. The elevator ride back to the penthouse felt like a victory parade. The boys chattered excitedly about their first business meeting, their successful presentation, and their plans to help Daddy with future board negotiations. When the elevator doors opened to their home, they found Kalisha waiting in the living room, her face anxious with worry. How did it go? She asked, studying Harrison's expression for clues. Daddy told the board that we get to choose our own family. Ethan announced, launching himself at her. And we gave a presentation with data. Oliver added, joining the hug. And we won, Caleb finished simply, completing their group embrace. Kalisha looked over their heads at Harrison, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Really? It's over. It's over, Harrison confirmed, though I have a feeling our real adventure is just beginning. As the boys dragged them both toward the kitchen to celebrate with victory pancakes, apparently regular pancakes weren't sufficient for this level of triumph. Harrison caught Kalisha's hand. There is one more thing, he said, his voice suddenly nervous in a way that made the boys stop chattering and pay attention. What? Kalisha asked, concern creeping into her voice. Harrison knelt down on one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. The boys gasped in unison, their eyes wide with excitement. Kalisha Williams, Harrison began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. 3 months ago, you volunteered to care for 3 stubborn, brilliant, wonderful boys who had given up on adults. You didn't just take care of them. You saw them, understood them, and loved them exactly as they were. Kalisha's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. But more than that, Harrison continued, you saved me. You showed me that success without family is just an expensive form of loneliness. You taught me that love isn't a weakness, it's the greatest strength we have. He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring that caught the light like a promise. Will you marry me? Will you let us make this official? Will you be our family legally and forever? Before Kalisha could answer, 3 small voices chimed in unison. Please say yes, Miss Kalisha. We already picked out a dress for you. Kalisha laughed through her tears, looking at the 4 males who'd become her world. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, of course, yes. The celebration that followed involved more hugging, more crying, mostly happy, and definitely more pancakes than any household should consume in one day. The boys immediately began planning the wedding, with Ethan volunteering to be the ring bearer, Oliver insisting on being the music director, and Caleb appointing himself as wedding coordinator. As Harrison slipped the ring onto Kailish's finger, while three 5-year-olds offered commentary on proper engagement protocol, she realized that her sister had been wrong about one thing. This wasn't a fantasy. This was real life, messy, complicated, beautiful real life with people who chose each other every day. 6 months later, at a wedding held in the penthouse's living room, because, as Caleb pointed out, that's where their family really began, Kailisha Williams became Kailisha Reed. The boys served as joint best men. The ceremony was officiated by a judge who'd never seen so much glitter in a legal proceeding, and the reception featured a 5-tier cake designed to look like the blanket fort where they'd first become a family. What's your favorite moment from Harrison and Kailisha's love story? Let us know in the comments. We love hearing from you. Richard Blackwell did not attend, but he sent an expensive wedding gift with a note that simply said, "Congratulations on choosing love." As Kailisha danced with her new husband, while 3 little boys spun around them like planets orbiting their sun, she thought about the day she'd volunteered to care for 3 stubborn triplets. She'd thought she was just taking a job. Instead, she'd found her family. And sometimes, the most beautiful stories begin with someone brave enough to volunteer for the impossible, stubborn enough to love unconditionally, and wise enough to know that the best families aren't born, they're chosen. The Reed family had chosen each other, and they were going to live happily ever after. All of them, together, forever.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.